It is 1 a.m. in Washington, 7 in Paris, and 2 on a Monday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Conn-young. Here are the top stories making headlines at this hour. North Korea begins live fire drills in the West Sea, and one shell falls south of the maritime border. South Korea returns fire in response. We will have the latest. Samsung SDI agrees to buy CHEIL Industries for about $3.3 billion in stock. Now, the deal is expected to create a financial unit that oversees roughly $8.9 billion. And the foreign ministers of the United States and Russia agree on the need for a diplomatic solution to the crisis in Ukraine. Now, we'll have those stories and more, but first we begin with this breaking news. North Korea has fired 3 artillery shells into the West Sea earlier today on this Monday, and one of them has fallen south of the NLL, the Northern Limit Line, which is the maritime border between the two Koreas. Now, South Korea has in response fired 10 to 20 or 30 even firings across the NLL, and we will have our correspondent Hwang Sang-hee live on the from our news center. Sang-hee, so give us the latest on that.
So, Conn-young, the two Koreas are trading live fire across their disputed inter-Korean maritime border. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said that North Korea began its live fire drill a little past noon this Monday afternoon in the West Sea border regions north of the Northern Limit Line. A spokesperson for the Joint Chiefs of Staff said some of the shells fired by North Korea dropped in the South Korean region and that the South responded with fire. The South's military said it was responding to shells landing in its waters from a North Korean live fire drill. Now, residents of South Korea's border island, Baengnyeong Island, has been told to evacuate to shelters. Now, this comes after North Korea notified South Korea earlier this morning that it will carry out a live fire drill during the day near the maritime border. The North had sent a fax to the South Korean Navy this morning announcing the exercises in 7 West Sea border regions north of the Northern Limit Line. It had not given a specific time for the planned exercise, but demanded that Seoul keep its vessels out of the trading zone. Now, since it is very rare for the North to warn and hold these naval exercises in all of the 7 regions, Seoul's defense ministry had said that the North's intentions may be hostile and that it will be keeping a close watch for possible clashes. Conn-young?
All right, Sang-hee, and we also know that hundreds of residents on Baengnyeong Island, which is in the West Sea, on the northern part of the West Sea, have been evacuated. Now, Sang-hee, thank you for that, and we will connect with you again later in the day. And now for some more expertise into the situation, we have Dr. Kim Chul-woo, senior researcher at the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses, live on the line. Dr. Kim, thank you for joining us. First of all, what do you make of the North live fire drills today?
I think it's not a typical live fire drill. It's a live fire provocation, I would say, because before the actual firing, before the 4 o'clock, 4 hours before, they faxed their intention for the live fire drills in 7 border regions instead of not specific 1 or 2 border regions. On top of that, with the backdrop of the North Korean warns of new type of nuclear test, and their intention is to increase the military tension and trying to induce the South Korea's kind of a response, military response to escalate the military tension here in Korea. So overall, this is not a typical live fire coastal artillery shells firing, not a drill. This is a pre-planned armed provocation, I would say. So South Korean military immediately exercised its right to self-defense as promised when Minister of National Defense Kim Kwon-jin repeatedly assured to the North Korean side their source of the, but this time we are very restrained in responding to attack the assisting side of the North Korean artillery.
Now, Dr. Kim, I suppose the question now in everyone's mind would be, was this, so one of the 3 artillery shells landed in waters south of the Northern Limit Line. Would you say it was intentional?
Yes, indeed. It's intentionally, obviously, because North Korea has stepped up its bellicose rhetoric, and then they, intentionally did live firing to the Baengnyeong Island. They repeatedly went to the Baengnyeong Island, so to be evacuated to the shelters, and the intention of the North Korean military to make a big splash with the South Koreans responding to North Korean case. So I think the North Korean People's Army, their intention is to make a international, disputing zone in the nearby the Baengnyeong Island area. So overall, this communist state announcement and actual firing invited the South Koreans' right to self-defense. So when they violated the jurisdiction and of the South Korean own territory. So whatever armed provocations will meet not the wait-and-see posture, and South Korean military will respond with the appropriate proportionate way.
Now, Dr. Kim, you briefly mentioned earlier on, but so what's your take on the latest series of North Korea's bellicose rhetoric or stepped-up rhetoric and, moves and acts that are defined by South Korean officials as being hostile? Why are they making such moves and stepping up their rhetoric now?
This kind of apparent show of defiance or show of force with the trilateral meeting at The Hague, United States and South Korea and Japan's trilateral meeting. And I particularly focus on the North Koreans' two mid-range ballistic missiles capable of striking Japan on last weekend. And they draw the condemnation from the United Security Council. So I think all this kind of scenario from the Pyongyang is Kim Jong-un's mindset is very strange. I would say like a March Madness basketball head coach style mindset. So they are losing game, so they want to do the whatever erratic gestures to reverse for their own benefits. I think the North Koreans' middle-range ballistic missiles, all the rockets, and these kind of enable nearby, coastal artillery shells is very premeditated actions to make a big fuss, and then trying back to the negotiating table. Probably they would have another six-party talks. So I think the North Koreans not directly attacked Baengnyeong, but they pretended to do. They did artillery fire drill, but actually it's pre-planned drills plus and provocations.
All right, Dr. Kim Cheol-woo, senior researcher at the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses. Thank you so much for your insights this afternoon. Now, moving on, Pyongyang's test firing of two mid-range ballistic missiles last week drew international condemnation, but that would pale in comparison to the response following a fourth nuclear test out of Pyongyang. The regime threatened as much on Sunday, but for now, Seoul says all is quiet, at least on the nuclear front in North Korea. Our Shin Se-min reports.
Despite Pyongyang's threat to carry out a fourth nuclear test, the South Korean government says there are no signs to indicate that one is in the works.
North Korea is capable of conducting nuclear or long-range missile tests at any time, but for now, there are no imminent signs of nuclear tests or missile launches.
Protesting a UN condemnation of its medium-range Nodong ballistic missile launches last week, North Korea raised tension Sunday by threatening to conduct a new type of nuclear test. It was the regime's first mid-range missile launch in 4 years and followed a series of short-range rocket firings over the past 2 months.
We would not rule out a new form of nuclear test for bolstering our nuclear deterrence.
In response, Seoul's foreign ministry warned North Korea to keep in mind that it will pay the price if it neglects the grave demands from its neighbors and the international community and pushes ahead with another nuclear test. The United States also urged North Korea to refrain from disturbing regional peace and security, saying any nuclear test or ballistic missile launch are a grave violation of UN Security Council resolutions and that it will only further isolating Pyongyang. According to 38 North, a website run by the U.S.-Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University, recent satellite imagery shows mountains north and south of North Korea's Punggye-ri test site have been excavated to complexes that could allow for multiple tests. Joel Witt, a former State Department official and editor of the 38 North website, said North Korea is capable of carrying out a test within 4 to 6 weeks once it decides to do so. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, meanwhile, the largest amphibious landing drill on the Korean peninsula in 2 decades is currently underway on the nation's southeast coast, and you can be sure that North Korea is paying close attention from afar. They regard the annual exercises as a rehearsal for invasion. Our national defense correspondent Kim Hyun-bin reports from Pohang.
U.S. and South Korean Marines blaze across the water to secure the shoreline and their positions on Korea's southeastern coast. The Marines are here for the joint South Korea-U.S. amphibious landing exercise, dubbed Double Dragon, which started on March 27th and runs through April 7th. As part of the annual Fall Eagle drills between the two allies.
Through this joint exercise, Korea and U.S. forces are working as one to suppress war with our might, while enhancing our interoperability.
This is the largest amphibious landing drill in South Korea in 2 decades, with over 12,500 U.S. and South Korean forces taking part. The 3rd Marines Expeditionary Brigade from Okinawa is here, along with 22 Osprey multi-mission aircraft, 13 naval vessels, and others.
Both the people of South Korea and the citizens of the United States ought to rest assured that their military is taking their missions very serious, that we're training as hard as we can. We're trying to do this in the most economical fashion that we can.
The Expeditionary Brigade played an active role in the Iraq War, and if a conflict were to break out on the peninsula, they'll be among the first to arrive. The Double Dragon drill seeks to enhance interoperability and working relationships between the two militaries across a range of operations, from disaster relief to complex expeditionary operations.
North Korea has condemned the drills, calling them a rehearsal for an invasion. Some experts said given the level of anger, it is highly likely that Pyongyang will conduct a ballistic missile launch or a 4th nuclear test before the drill is over on April 7th. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News, Pohang.
Washington has reportedly given its first positive response toward delaying the transfer of wartime operational control to South Korea from the end of 2015. South Korea's Korean Broadcasting System, or KBS, reported this Monday that the U.S. may make its decision official during President Barack Obama's visit to Seoul next month. Well, the report says the positive outlook stems from a constructive meeting between the two countries' top military officers in Washington earlier this month. However, South Korea's defense ministry declined to comment on this report. Seoul wants to transfer pushed back from the current scheduled date of December 2015, citing the ongoing and unpredictable threat posed by North Korea. North Korea and Japan's first government-level talks in more than a year got off to a bumpy start Sunday amid differences over a range of bilateral issues. Reports out of Beijing, where the talks are underway, say officials from the two sides spent hours simply trying to agree on what they should talk about. Well, Tokyo reportedly demanded an investigation into the whereabouts of hundreds of Japanese nationals thought to have been abducted by Pyongyang in the 1970s and 80s. Pyongyang wants Japan to relax sanctions imposed after the North 2006 long-range missile test. The Japanese side also likely protested that North Korea's recent provocations, including its threat on Sunday to carry out a new form of nuclear test. These talks will continue this Monday.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Conn-young live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market for the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and the Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Now, on the nation's economic front, Korea posted a current account surplus for the 24th straight month in February as trade gains widened and the service account deficit fell. Our economics correspondent Hwang Ji-hye has this report.
Korea's central bank said Monday that the nation posted a current account surplus of over $4.5 billion last month. That's up over $1 billion from January and more than double from February of last year. Exports of goods rose over 7% from the previous year to $48 billion, while imports edged up slightly more than 1% to $42.6 billion. When asked if the surplus was coming from the nation's sluggish domestic demand, officials at the central bank attributed subdued imports to stable global commodities prices. The deficit in the service account, which includes tourism and shipping, also fell, helping the nation log a current account surplus for the 24th straight month. It posted a deficit of around $1.5 billion last month, compared with a shortfall of nearly $2 billion in January. The current account data was released based on a new international standard. Under the new standard, last year's current account surplus widened to $79.8 billion, up around $9 billion from the previous data. The central bank said last year's surplus accounted for 6% of the nation's gross domestic product. The nation's current account surplus has been acting as a buffer for Korea since the U.S. Federal Reserve has been scaling back its massive bond-buying stimulus program. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Two Samsung Group companies are merging. The deal, announced this Monday, has Samsung SDI, the group's unit in charge of developing battery technologies, acquiring the group's textile firm, CHEIL Industries. The merger will be finalized in July, and when that's done, Samsung SDI will be one of the conglomerate's biggest business units with market capitalization of 10 trillion won. That is, of course, roughly $9.3 billion and assets worth $14 billion. Samsung SDI has been developing display and parts technologies with a new emphasis on batteries since the year 2002. CHEIL Industries has been involved in the fashion, chemical, and electronic material industries since being founded in 1954. And in an eye-opening sign of how much the Korean economy relies on its two biggest companies, new data shows the combined revenue of Samsung Electronics and Hyundai Motor accounts for more than 1/5 of this country's total GDP. Well, figures from Korea's central bank and the nation's financial watchdog on Monday show the consolidated revenue of the two firms logged 316 trillion won last year, which is roughly $300 billion. Now, that is equivalent to 22% of Korea's nominal GDP, with Samsung Electronics accounting for 16% and Hyundai Motor 6%. The portion of their revenue to GDP has been on the rise from a combined 17% 4 years ago. The two companies also tops market capitalization, with the two, when put together, standing at a staggering 19% on the Korean bourse. No deal. After 4 hours of talks, the top American and Russian diplomats agreed on one thing: that the crisis in Ukraine requires a diplomatic solution. But they agreed on little else. Our Kim Young-gil reports.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov discussed ways to resolve the Ukraine crisis during talks in Paris on Sunday. But the two men parted ways without any agreement in place.
In a frank conversation this evening with Foreign Minister Lavrov, I made clear that the United States still considers the Russian actions to be illegal and illegitimate, and Russia's actions over the past several weeks have placed it at odds, obviously, with the rule of law and the international community.
After 4 hours of talks, both sides recognized the importance of finding a diplomatic solution that meets the needs of the Ukrainian people. But they agreed on little else. Lavrov repeated that Russia has no plans to invade Ukraine and said he and Kerry had discussed setting up a neutral federal government in Ukraine.
All political forces in Ukraine will have an equal voice and can agree on which kind of concrete political, economic, financial, social, religious traditions will be respected in different parts of the country so that it becomes united and represents all the values of the Ukrainian people.
Ukrainian officials are hesitant to decentralize power. They fear that doing so would give more power to pro-Russia regions, something that could harm its aspirations to be a greater part of Europe and potentially tear the country apart. The Kerry-Lavrov meeting in Paris came days before NATO foreign ministers meet in Brussels on Tuesday and Wednesday, where talks are likely to center on Russia and its actions in Crimea and Ukraine. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
And now it's time for our daily arts and culture segment. Our Im Yoon-hee is here to share this week's latest. Good afternoon to you, Yoon-hee.
Good afternoon, Conn-young. So today I have an exhibition that centers on a collection of very old maps. Now, these maps were collected to provide evidence in a dispute that dates back decades over what to call the body of water between Korea and Japan. Now, the map collector has spent the last 30 years of her life collecting these maps in hopes that she can prove and provide evidence for this dispute. So let's take a look.
It's human nature to be curious. In fact, curiosity is what drove people to the unknown, leading to the creation of the universal language of a map. These lines and shapes have come together over the years, drawn by many, used by many more. Early world maps date back to hundreds of centuries ago. And since, map makers, also known as cartographers, have been blending art and science, creating these masterpieces. But as beautiful as a map is to look at, they're undeniably necessary in our lives, both in the present as well as for the past.
This exhibition is meant to be seen by many people. We want them to come and learn from these maps because maps have something to say. They're not just to look at, they're meant to be read and used to record history.
Kim Hae-jung has been actively studying and collecting maps since her second year in college. She's been all over the world studying cartography and how maps came to be. It all started when she realized that the body of water between Japan and Korea had originally been called Sea of Chosun, referring to the ancient Chosun dynasty of Korea. These maps, also made in Japan, continue to show that body of water as Sea of Chosun, even as the years go by.
This map is called Shinjeong Manguk-jeondo, made in 1810 in Japan. Here it's labeled Sea of Chosun. This map made by the Japanese shows that they called it Sea of Chosun, and Koreans at the time also recognize it by that name as well. Now, if you look here, it says the Great Sea of Japan. Before the 1700s, these bodies of waters weren't labeled, but during the 1800s, they started labeling the seas aligned with the beginning of the Japanese colonialism.
It's not just the maps made in Japan. Maps from around the world show similar findings. Cartographers from various countries continually labeled the body of water as Korean Sea or Gulf of Korea, yet many people today still fail to recognize this title. Kim is determined to correct this error and pass on the truth for the generations to come, because she believes yesterday's history is today, and today is tomorrow.
Well, definitely, Yoon-hee, a very meaningful report, and I think many more of these kind of maps and old maps that prove the actual name of that body of water is required for Japan to make corrections for its remnants of its atrocities during World War II.
Exactly.
All right, thank you, Yoon-hee, for that.
My pleasure.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone is enjoying the view of cherry blossoms because of unseasonably warm weather. Now, the flowers have bloomed about 18 days earlier than the previous year, so make sure to check them out. Now, some of the places to check out are at Yangjaecheon and Yeouido Park and the Samcheong Park, which have trails full of cherry blossoms. Now, going over to our satellite map for details. We have cloudy skies as well as some fog remaining, but it looks like it will clear up more today, and the air quality is very good with the fine dust level at normal. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul tops out at 22 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak up to 21 and 18 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island peaks over to 17, while Dokdo and Mangeumgang both tops out at 13. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Conn-young.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. And that's all from me at this hour. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with Business Today at 4 p.m. Korea time. See you then.